The cowboy reached for her hand just as flames climbed the cabin walls. But the words she whispered stopped him cold. Snow blasted sideways through the broken barn doors while horses slammed against their stalls in panic. Cole could barely hear over the crack of burning timber and the distant thunder of riders coming through the trees. Sadie stood trembling beside the firelight, clutching a small wooden box to her chest like it mattered more than her own life. Then she looked at him and said something that made him forget the storm for a second. What she revealed changed the way he saw her forever. If you enjoy heartfelt Western love stories, stay with us and share where you're watching from tonight. Winter came early to western Montana in 1887. Snow covered the open grasslands around the Bennett Ranch before Thanksgiving had even passed. The fences disappeared beneath white drifts. The horse troughs froze over every morning. Beyond the fields, the Bitterroot Mountains stood dark beneath low clouds, their peaks hidden behind wind-blown snow. Inside the old ranch house, the smell of boiled herbs and lamp oil clung to the walls. Cole Bennett sat beside his mother's bed with both elbows resting on his knees, his hat hanging loosely from one hand. He had not slept more than a few hours in 3 days. His beard had grown rough along his jaw, and melted snow still darkened the shoulders of his coat from the ride back from the south pasture. The old woman beneath the quilt looked smaller than he remembered. Evelyn Bennett had once been the kind of woman people stepped aside for without realizing they had done it. Even now, weak from fever, there was something steady in her eyes. The fire crackled softly beside the bed while wind brushed against the windows. She reached for his hand slowly. Cole leaned closer at once. "Don't marry for pretty smiles," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, scraped raw by sickness. "Don't marry for land either. Men out here ruin themselves chasing both." Cole lowered his head slightly. "You should rest, Mama." But she tightened her fingers around his hand with surprising strength. "Find a good woman," she said. "Find one who still knows how to stay kind when life stops being kind to her." Outside, a loose shutter banged once against the house. Cole swallowed hard. "There aren't many left like that," she continued. "Most folks turn hard after enough winters." The fire popped sharply. Then she looked toward him again, tired but certain. "When the cattle die, when the roof leaks, when money disappears, you'll know her by who she becomes then." Those were the last clear words she ever spoke to him. 3 days later, church bells echoed across the frozen valley, while ranchers gathered beneath gray skies for her burial. Snow clung to black coats and horse saddles. Men removed their hats near the graveyard fence while women whispered softly beneath wool shawls. Cole stood through the entire service without moving. Afterward, people lingered near the wagons offering condolences and invitations. Widows introduced daughters. Bankers invited him to dinners. A cattle owner from Helena suggested a partnership between families. Cole barely heard any of it. Winter passed, then another. The Bennett Ranch continued growing larger while Cole himself seemed to drift farther away from everyone around him. He traveled often now. Rodeo fairs in Idaho, cattle auctions in Wyoming, church socials in mining towns where piano music spilled through saloon doors late into the night. Everywhere felt the same. Young women smiled too quickly once they heard his last name. Fathers talked about property lines before supper. Plates were cleared. Mothers studied his coat buttons and silver watch chain more carefully than his face. Cole always left before sunrise. By the second year, people had started talking. Some called him cold. Others claimed he carried a broken heart nobody knew about. The truth was simpler than that. Nothing felt real anymore. Then came Cedar Ridge. Rain hammered the muddy streets the evening he arrived. Water dripped from wagon roofs, while lanterns flickered weakly through the storm. Cole tied his horse outside Miller's Feed and Supply and stepped inside with snowmelt running from the brim of his hat. The The store smelled of wet wool, tobacco, and grain sacks. Near the stove, two older women sorted dried beans into tin bowls, while talking quietly between themselves. Cole paid little attention at first. He stood near the counter warming his hands around a cup of burnt coffee. Then one of the women sighed softly. That girl still brings soup to the old trapper who cursed her father till the day he died. The other woman shook her head slowly. Hard life never made her cruel. That's rare out here. Something about the way she said it made Cole glance over. The first woman nodded toward the dark windows. Sadie Harper's stronger than most men in this county. Shame nobody ever notices till they need something. Rain rattled harder against the roof. Cole stared down into his coffee for a long moment. He did not ask questions, did not interrupt. But later that night, while checking into a narrow room above the general store, he found himself standing by the window looking north toward the dark tree line beyond town. Somewhere past those woods lived a woman people barely remembered, unless kindness forced them to. And for the first time in a very long while, something restless inside him finally grew quiet enough to listen. Cole left Cedar Ridge before sunrise. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but the roads were still thick with mud and half-frozen wagon tracks. Thin fog clung to the open fields beyond town. His horse moved carefully through the narrow trail leading north, while pine trees crowded closer with every mile. The farther he rode, the quieter the world became. No church bells, no saloons waking for the morning, only wind moving through branches heavy with snow. Around noon, the clouds darkened again. Cole crossed a shallow creek where thin sheets of ice cracked beneath the horse's hooves. Ahead, smoke drifted weakly through the trees. Then he saw the cabin. It sat near the edge of the woods beneath a crooked ridge of pines. One side of the barn leaned slightly under the weight of old winters. A wagon wheel rested upside down beside the fence. Near the porch steps, split logs had been stacked carefully beneath a canvas tarp tied down with rope and stones. And near the corral stood a woman pulling lumber into place alone. Cole slowed his horse without realizing it. Sadie Harper had both sleeves rolled above her wrists despite the cold. Snowmelt darkened the hem of her skirt. A coil of rope pressed against one shoulder while she dragged a heavy cedar beam toward the half-broken barn gate. One of her gloves was missing. Her bare hand had already split open near the palm from the rope burn. Still, she kept working. She did not glance toward the road when Cole approached. Did not stop. Did not smile politely the way women usually did once they recognized him. Cole climbed down from the saddle slowly. "You'll lose that fence before dark," he said. Sadie pulled the beam upright and finally looked at him. Her eyes moved once across his coat, his horse, the silver buckle near his belt. Nothing changed in her expression. "Storm's coming," she said calmly. "Tie your horse before the wind gets worse." Then she turned back toward the gate. Cole stood there another second before doing exactly what she said. The first gusts arrived. Minutes later, cold enough to sting his face. Snow swirled through the trees while Sadie hammered nails into the cedar post with steady movements. Her hair had partly slipped loose beneath her scarf, but she paid no attention to it. Cole stepped beside the fence and grabbed the other end of the beam before she could object. For a moment she looked ready to refuse. Then another hard gust bent the post sideways again. She handed him the hammer without a word. The sound of hooves suddenly echoed through the trees behind them. A rider burst through the narrow trail at full speed. "Mistress Harper!" the man shouted before even reaching the yard. His horse nearly slipped in the mud. The rider pulled hard on the reins and jumped down breathlessly. He looked around 30, broad-shouldered beneath a soaked canvas coat with fresh sawdust still clinging to one sleeve. "Mason?" Sadie said quietly. "They're back." Those two words changed something in the air immediately. Mason Reed wiped rainwater from his face and lowered his voice. "I saw wagons near the north crossing. County men, too. They brought papers. Sadie did not answer right away. Snow drifted sideways between them. Finally, she set the hammer down on the fence rail. How many? 3 wagons. Maybe 6 riders. Mason glanced toward Cole only briefly before looking back at her. They're saying your father owed more money than anyone knew. Cole watched Sadie carefully then. No shouting. No panic. Her hand tightened once around the edge of the post before letting go. Bring your horse into the barn, she told Mason. No sense letting him freeze before supper. Mason looked almost frustrated by how calm she sounded. You hear what I said? Yes. And you're not worried? Sadie looked toward the dark hills north of the property. I've been worried since spring. That was the moment Cole noticed how tired she looked beneath the calmness. Not weak, just tired in the way people became after carrying fear too long. The wind picked up harder. Cole reached for the loose barn door while Mason led the horses inside. Snow blew across the yard now in fast white streaks. You should both come in, Sadie said. Coffee's still warm. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke and black coffee. A kettle rested above the stove. Folded quilts sat neatly beside the wall. Near the fireplace stood a stack of unopened letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. Cole noticed them immediately. Some carried official county stamps. Others had Eastern return addresses. Sadie poured coffee into thick ceramic cups without asking how either man took it. Mason sat heavily near the stove. Folks around Cedar Ridge are scared, he muttered. The Talbot family packed up last month. Left half their cattle behind. Cole looked up. Railroad pressure? Mason nodded grimly. Edgar Pike's buying land through debt claims. Some people fight him. Most don't stay long enough. At the sound of that name, Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew Edgar Pike, a polished land broker with expensive boots and clean fingernails. The kind of man who smiled while stealing ranches from widows too exhausted to fight paperwork. Cole wrapped one hand around the warm coffee cup. What does Pike want with this place? He asked. Sadie stared quietly into the fire. That's the strange part, she said. This land shouldn't matter much to anyone. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere deep in the mountains. Then Cole noticed something through the frosted window near the porch. Wooden stakes, fresh ones, half buried in snow near the tree line north of the cabin. Survey markers. Cole stepped closer to the window until his breath fogged the glass. The stakes stood crooked beneath the falling snow, each one marked with faded red paint. Railroad crews usually placed them near open valleys or river crossings, not hidden deep beside a lonely cabin at the edge of pine woods. Sadie followed his gaze. They weren't there in September, she said quietly. Mason cursed under his breath near the stove. Pike's men came through once before the first frost, claimed they were checking river access. Cole kept staring outside. River access doesn't require hidden markers. The room fell silent after that. Only the kettle rattled softly above the fire. That night, the storm closed around the cabin hard enough to swallow the entire valley. Wind shoved against the walls until the old boards groaned. Snow packed itself against the porch steps. Somewhere outside, the loose barn chain clanged again and again in the darkness. Cole offered to leave before the roads disappeared completely. Sadie shook her head while folding another blanket near the fire. You won't make it across Miller's Crossing in this weather, she said it plainly, not warmly. Just true. So Cole stayed. The next morning, the world outside had vanished beneath white. Snow buried half the fence line. The horses stood close together inside the barn with frost clinging to their backs. Cole spent most of the morning repairing loose roof planks while wind cut through his coat sleeves. Below him, Sadie hauled fresh water from the pump with both hands wrapped in cloth strips where the rope burns had split her skin. Around noon, she stepped into the barn carrying a small tin cup. Coffee. Cole climbed down from the ladder slowly and took it from her. The cup was warm enough to sting his frozen fingers. You didn't have to bring this out here. You've been on that roof 3 hours. Snowflakes clung to the loose strands of hair near her face. Her cheeks had turned pink from the cold. She looked tired again. Cole noticed she coughed once before turning away toward the horses. Not dramatic. Small, like she hoped nobody would hear it. That evening she sat near the oil lamp, mending the torn shoulder of his coat, while he sharpened tools beside the stove. The room smelled faintly of leather, cedar smoke, and beef stew simmering low over the fire. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence no longer felt empty. At one point, Sadie pushed the needle carefully through thick canvas and said, "You don't seem much like the stories people tell." Cole glanced up from the whetstone. "What stories are those that you're too proud to settle down?" A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. "And what do you think now?" Sadie tied off the thread slowly before answering. "I think lonely men look proud from far away." The fire cracked between them. Cole looked at her for a long moment after that. Later that night, a horse began kicking wildly inside the barn. Sadie was already awake before Cole reached the door. She crossed the snow carrying a lantern, while wind snapped her coat around her legs. Inside the barn, one of the mares had tangled herself against the stall gate in panic. "Easy now," Sadie whispered softly. Her hand moved along the horse's neck until the animal finally settled. Cole watched her loosen the strap carefully, with fingers still raw from the rope burns. "You've done this alone a long time," he said. Sadie kept her eyes on the mare. "Long enough." The next afternoon, the storm weakened just enough for Cole and Mason to ride north toward the creek. Snow still covered most of the ground, but signs remained if a man knew where to look. Fresh shovel marks, lantern ash, wagon ruts hidden beneath the trees. Then farther uphill they found something worse. Wooden crates stacked beneath canvas tarps. Blasting powder. Mason crouched near the tracks in the snow. These weren't left by railroad workers. Cole nodded grimly. A voice suddenly drifted through the pines ahead. "Once the woman loses the cabin, the spring belongs to us." Both men froze instantly. Another voice laughed low. "Pike says the whole valley dries up without it." Cole slowly looked toward Mason. Spring, not railroad tracks. Water. A cold feeling settled in his chest then. Whoever controlled that underground spring would control cattle routes for miles once summer drought arrived. That evening they returned to the cabin after dark. Sadie listened quietly while Cole explained what they had heard. For the first time since he met her, real fear crossed her face. She sat slowly beside the fire and stared into the flames. "My father knew something was wrong before he died," she admitted. Cole leaned forward slightly. "What kind of something?" Sadie hesitated. Then she stood and walked toward the old bookshelf near the staircase. From behind it she pulled a folded map, yellowed with age. "My father said if men ever came for this land," she said softly, "there was a box hidden somewhere inside this house." Masons looked up sharply. "What kind of box?" Sadie unfolded the map with careful hands. He said it held proof. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees again. And somewhere beyond the storm-dark woods, Edgar Pike was already waiting for the snow to clear. The cabin felt smaller after Sadie mentioned the hidden box. Mason stood near the stove, rubbing warmth back into his hands while Cole unfolded the old map across the kitchen table. The paper had grown soft at the creases from years of handling. Pencil marks crossed the northern hills above the creek. Near the corner, Sadie's father had written dates beside short notes in faded ink. "Water runs deeper than they know. Do not trust county records." Cole read the lines twice. "Did he ever say where the box was hidden?" he asked. Sadie shook her head slowly. "He got sick before he could explain much." Her fingers rested lightly against the edge of the map. After that, people started coming around, asking questions. The storm worsened toward evening. Snow hissed against the windows. The lantern light flickered. Each time, wind slipped through the cracks near the roof beams. Somewhere upstairs, an old floorboard creaked softly with the shifting cold. They searched anyway. Mason checked loose boards beneath the staircase, while Cole moved furniture away from the walls, one piece at a time. Sadie climbed into the attic carrying the oil lamp, brushing aside old quilts and trunks coated in dust. Hours passed. Nothing. At one point, Mason let out a tired breath. Could have already been taken years ago. Sadie did not answer. She knelt beside an old cedar chest near the attic wall, running her hand slowly across the carved wood. Cole watched her from below for a moment. Her shoulders looked tight now. Not frightened exactly, just carrying too much hope too carefully. Then something caught beneath his boot downstairs. A scrape. Cole looked down. One leg of the kitchen table sat uneven against the floorboards. He crouched slowly and reached underneath. His fingers closed around cold metal. A small brass key. Sadie appeared at the top of the stairs, almost instantly when he held it up. For the first time since he arrived, real surprise crossed her face. "My father used to keep a key exactly like that," she whispered. The three of them searched the cabin again with new urgency. Snow battered the roof overhead while lantern light shook across the walls. Finally, Sadie stopped beside the wardrobe near her bedroom door. "Help me move this." Cole grabbed one side while Mason took the other. The wardrobe dragged heavily across the floorboards, revealing a narrow outline hidden in the wall behind it. A small locked door. Nobody spoke for a second. Sadie's hand trembled once before she slid the brass key into place. The lock clicked softly. Inside the hidden space sat a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Cole heard Sadie draw in a quiet breath. She carried the box carefully to the table, while Mason shut the shutters tighter against the storm. The lid creaked open slowly beneath her hands. Inside rested stacks of folded receipts tied with leather cord, property records, county stamps, signed payment ledgers, and beneath them lay a weathered notebook. Cole opened it first. Page after page listed land transfers, water routes, private agreements, and names connected to Edgar Pike. Some entries described families forced from their ranches after sudden debt claims appeared against them. Then Cole reached the final pages. His jaw tightened. "He knew," he said quietly. Sadie looked up. "Knew what?" Cole turned the notebook toward her. "Your spring controls the valley. If Pike gains it, every ranch north of Cedar Ridge depends on him for water." Before Sadie could answer, a sharp crack exploded downstairs, the front door. Mason grabbed the rifle instantly. Another crash shook the cabin harder. Then voices, men shouting through the storm. Cole blew out one lantern at once. "Back exit," he asked quietly. Sadie nodded toward the rear hallway. A third crash splintered through the house. Wood broke somewhere below. "Sadie Harper," a voice called from outside. "Calm, smooth, dangerous. You can hand over the papers peacefully." Edgar Pike. Mason cocked the rifle with shaking hands. Cole stepped closer to Sadie automatically without thinking about it. The fourth hit burst the front door inward. Wind and snow roared into the cabin. "Go!" Mason hissed. Cole grabbed the wooden box while Sadie led him through the back passage toward the barn. Freezing air struck them hard the moment they stepped outside. Snow reached nearly to the porch railing now. Behind them, boots thundered across the cabin floor. Men overturned furniture. Glass shattered. Cole and Sadie crossed the yard through blinding snow, while the barn doors slammed wildly in the wind. Inside, frightened horses stamped and snorted against their stalls. Sadie reached for the lantern hanging beside the tack wall, just as shouting erupted behind them again. "They're outside!" One of Pike's men appeared through the snow near the corral gate. Cole shoved Sadie behind him and swung a heavy wooden rail loose from the fence. The man stumbled backward after the blow and disappeared into the storm. Then came another sound. Gunfire, brief, sharp, Mason. Sadie flinched hard at the noise. A second later, flames burst suddenly through one of the cabin windows. An overturned lantern had caught the curtains near the front room. Orange light spread across the snow. No, Sadie whispered. The fire climbed fast along the dry wood siding, while wind fed it higher. For one terrible moment she stood frozen, watching the home her father built begin to burn. Then rough hands grabbed her arm from behind, one of Pike's men. Cole moved instantly. He pulled the man away from her and drove him backward into the frozen mud near the barn doors. The stranger slipped hard against the ice while Cole dragged Sadie behind the horse stalls. Her breathing had turned uneven now. Tears mixed with melted snow across her face, though she tried hard to hide them. "It's happening again," she whispered brokenly. "Just like before." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, at the exhaustion, the years of carrying fear alone, the stubbornness that had kept her standing anyway. "You're not alone this time," he said. Then, from somewhere beyond the storm came another sound. Horse hooves, dozens of them. Lantern light moved through the trees like scattered stars across the snow. Riders poured into the yard from every direction. Horses pushed through the storm while voices carried across the frozen ground. An old shepherd dog barked wildly beside the lead wagon. Edgar Pike stepped out from the shadows near the burning cabin, his coat dusted white with snow. For the first time since arriving at the property, he no longer looked calm. Men from Cedar Ridge rode into the yard, carrying rifles across their saddle horns and lanterns swinging from leather hooks. Cole recognized several faces immediately. Old Mr. Talbot from the flour mill, Widow Colleen, wrapped in a heavy gray shawl atop a mule, Father Brennan from the church near the river crossing. Even Tomas Alvarez, the sheep rancher who rarely came into town, sat mounted beside the fence with snow frozen into his beard. Mason let out a rough breath from inside the barn doorway, one hand pressed against the blood soaking through his coat sleeve. "You actually came," he muttered. Widow Colleen climbed stiffly down from her mule. "Course we did," she snapped. "That girl fixed my roof 2 winters ago when nobody else bothered." Another voice rose from the crowd. "She sat with my boy through scarlet fever, and she brought wood after my husband died." More voices followed after that. Small things, quiet things, the kind most people forgot until the moment they mattered. Sadie stood very still beside Cole while snow melted slowly against her hair. Her eyes moved across the crowd, almost like she could not understand what she was seeing. Pike understood it perfectly. His men had already begun backing away from the burning cabin. "This is still legal county business," Pike called sharply. "You people don't know what you're interfering with." Father Brennan rode one step forward through the snow. "Funny," the old priest said. "County business usually doesn't happen after midnight with armed men and broken doors." A few tired laughs moved through the crowd. Pike's expression hardened. Then Cole stepped forward, carrying the leather journal beneath one arm. "Your signatures are all over these records," he said evenly. "Bribes, forced debt claims, water rights hidden from landowners." Pike's face changed slightly then. Only slightly. But enough. Sheriff Doyle finally rode into the yard moments later with 2 deputies behind him. Snow clung heavily to the sheriff's shoulders. He looked from the burning cabin to Pike, then toward the gathered townspeople. Nobody spoke. The storm itself seemed quieter now. Cole handed him the journal. "You'll want to read that before deciding who leaves in chains tonight." Doyle opened the first few pages beneath lantern light. His jaw tightened immediately. Pike took one careful step backward. That notebook proves nothing. But the sheriff had already seen enough. By sunrise, Pike and 2 of his men were riding south beneath armed escort, while smoke still drifted from the ruined cabin roof. News spread fast after that. Faster than Pike could stop it. County officials arrived within days. Survey crews disappeared from the valley. Families who had nearly abandoned their land returned carrying old receipts and unpaid claims. And for the first time in years, people spoke openly about what had really been happening around Cedar Ridge. Winter slowly loosened its grip after that. The snowbanks shrank along the fences. Water dripped from barn roofs during the afternoons. Mud returned to the wagon roads. Sadie moved into Widow Colleen's spare room, while neighbors helped clear what remained of the burned cabin. Some days she worked quietly beside them, carrying boards or sorting through blackened tools. Other days she simply stood near the old porch foundation, looking toward the pine trees. Cole stayed another week before returning south to the Bennett Ranch. He left before dawn. No long goodbye, no promises. Sadie watched him saddle his horse beneath the pale morning sky while frost still silvered the grass. "You'll have roads to cover before the thaw," she said softly. Cole nodded once. For a second it looked like he meant to say something more. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a pair of new leather gloves. Thick winter ones lined with wool. "For the rope burns," he said. Then he rode away through the melting snow. The weeks afterward felt strangely quiet, too quiet. Sadie tried not to think much about him after that. She helped Widow Colleen mend curtains, hauled water from the well each morning, rode into town twice a week to help Father Brennan sort donated supplies for families reclaiming their ranches. But sometimes near evening she still found herself looking south toward the valley road without meaning to. Then spring finally arrived. The snow melted off the hillsides first. Green returned slowly across the pastureland. Pine trees released the sharp, clean smell of thawing sap into the morning air. Sadie stood outside the ruined cabin one morning, carrying a bucket of nails, when she heard wagon wheels approaching through the mud. At first, she thought it was another supply delivery from town. Then she saw the line of cedar lumber wagons coming up the trail, 6 of them. Behind the first wagon rode Cole Bennett. Her breath caught slightly before she could stop it. Several workers followed behind him, leading horses loaded with fence posts and fresh-cut beams. One wagon carried windows wrapped carefully in blankets. Cole climbed down slowly once he reached the yard. Mud clung to his boots now instead of snow. "You really came all the way back for this place?" Sadie asked quietly. Cole looked toward the remains of the old cabin, then toward her. "No," he said. His voice stayed calm, but something gentler sat beneath it now. "I came back for the woman inside it." For a moment neither of them moved. Wind carried softly through the pines behind them. Somewhere farther down the hill, one of the workers began unloading cedar posts near the pasture fence. Sadie lowered her eyes briefly, not shy, just overwhelmed in a way she had no practice hiding. By summer, a new cabin stood overlooking the valley, not larger than the old one, just stronger. The wedding happened near the creek after the spring runoff finally settled. Townspeople gathered beneath open sky while children chased each other through wet grass beside the horses. There was no fancy ballroom, no polished silver, only fiddle music drifting through warm mountain air, and the smell of pinewood smoke from the cooking fires nearby. Cole stood beside Sadie beneath the cottonwood trees while Father Brennan finished the vows. And when church bells echoed faintly from Cedar Ridge far across the valley, Sadie looked out toward the mountains her father once fought so hard to protect. The fences stood repaired again. The creek still ran clear, and beside her stood the man who had crossed half the West searching for a good woman. Without realizing, she had been waiting quietly near the pine woods all along. For the first time in years, neither of them faced the coming winter alone. Maybe that's the part that stays with you after a story like this ends. Not the fire, not the fight over the land, not even the men who tried to take what didn't belong to them. Maybe it's the thought of what it feels like to spend years carrying everything alone, only to find one person willing to stay when the hard season comes. Most folks out west learned early how to survive, but surviving and being seen are not always the same thing. Sadie spent so much of her life believing she had to endure quietly that she almost forgot what it felt like to be chosen. And Cole spent years riding from town to town, thinking he was searching for the right woman, when deep down he was searching for peace. Maybe some of you know that feeling too. Maybe you've loved carefully for so long that you stopped expecting anyone to come back for you. And maybe that's why stories like this matter. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks back into your life carrying cedar wood, muddy boots, and the simple promise that you won't face the next winter by yourself. If this story stayed with you tonight, tell me where you're listening from and what moment touched your heart the most. And if you'd like, stay a little longer. There are still more quiet towns, forgotten people, old secrets, and heartfelt Western love stories waiting down the next trail.